Hi everyone. Welcome to our webinar on addressing challenging behavior. I'm Nicole Neal. I'm a faculty member at Western University. I'm a board certified behavior analyst. And I'm going to be talking to you about some behavior analytic strategies for addressing challenging behavior tonight. As you can see, it's going to be recorded and we'll send that out to you guys at a later time. So applied behavior analysis, if you're not familiar with it, is the scientific study of the change of behaviors of socially significant responses. So we're really looking at things that are important to individuals and their quality of life. And we're using those textbook learning principles, and I'll be talking about a few of them as we go on, reinforcement to change those behaviors that are important to an individual. And typically when we're looking at challenging behavior, the first person that you might be contacting is what's called a board certified behavior analyst. This is what my background is in, and this is an individual who is trained in the science and the practice of applied behavior analysis. We currently offer a program in applied behavior analysis here at Western. So if you go through this webinar and you see something that catches your eye or you want to learn more, this is what it would take to learn about these principles and be trained in applying those principles to socially significant responses. So let's start talking about what challenging behavior is. I have here a textbook definition, and of course, textbook definitions are not going to really click with you, but you may be here because you're thinking of a particular individual or a particular student who's experiencing some challenges that interfere with their ability to learn, to their ability to engage with other individuals, to really participate fully in school life or student life or home life, and that's what brought you here. And so that's what we mean by challenging behavior. It's really anything that is going to interfere with an individual's ability to participate fully in their environment, to meet their goals, to learn things, to play with others, to participate with others. That's what we're talking about when we mean challenging behavior. And it can take all sorts of different forms. It could be injury to themselves, injury to others, just problematic kinds of things, off-task behavior, but it's interfering with their ability to participate in life. And I'm here to tell you that there are strategies that can free you from this behavior, can free you from the challenges associated with it and allow them to participate fully in whatever they desire. And this freedom is possible without necessarily medication, without restraints, without token boards or stickers or treats. We're going to talk about strategies that are really applicable to your daily life, that are easy, and we're going to learn about those principles that help guide the types of interventions that allow you to achieve freedom. And the first step to doing this is understanding the behavior and the learner, understanding why they're engaging in these challenging behaviors, what's limiting them, what do they get from it. And we're going to teach them the skills to fully engage in their environment, to engage with others, to engage with the world. And we're going to do it while respecting their choices and their desires and their wants and their needs. So this isn't strategies that dictate everything the learner has to do or the individual has to do. We're going to be able to respect the wants and the needs of the individual, of the child, of the person experiencing challenging behavior. And to do this, we use what's called functional behavior assessment and functional approaches to teaching responses. And the goal of a functional assessment is to determine the context that's relevant, the context that influences problem behavior or challenging behavior. the principles that we use, we see challenging behavior as coming from the environment, the context that a person is embedded in. So we want to look at what's around an individual that influences them to engage in these behaviors, what's around them that changes their behavior. And so we're not looking at what's wrong with the learner. We're not looking about their personality. We're not looking at their internal factors or emotions or problems that they come with. We're looking at what can we do outside of this individual. What do they interact with in their everyday life, and how can we understand how that influences their behavior, and how can we understand how to change that in order to change their behavior. So it's not about the learner, it's about you. And unfortunately, that means that you're going to have to change in order to change that person's behavior. So to do this, first thing we need to do is really understand that context. And we do that by thinking about the ABCs of behavior. So the first thing that we need to do is understand what. What are we talking about? What response? So there's a little slide error there, whatever. We're talking about behavior, what it is, it's observable or measurable. We want to define the behavior in a way that anyone can look at it, anyone can see it, and anyone can count it. So we want to think about what does the learner do that we want to change, exactly what they're doing. And we want to state it in a way that anyone could see it, anyone could measure it, could count it, could time it, and could agree on it. So typically when we talk about challenging behavior, we use really loose, not well-defined terms. We use things like, I have a really disruptive student. But what does it actually mean to be disruptive? What is the person performing that makes them disruptive? That's what we want to do when we're finding an observable, measurable response. So is it talking out when a teacher is providing instruction? Is it screaming or yelling? Is it singing while they're doing their work? These are all disruptive behaviors, but they're in a way that anyone could see them, be able to make a timer or a tally mark whenever they perform that response. We also talk a lot about students having attention problems. Well, attention problems can look like a whole bunch of different things. They could be tapping or drumming on a desk. They could be just staring off, looking into the distance. They could be playing on an iPad or a laptop while they're doing their work. These are all attentional problems, but we want to state them in a way that makes it clear exactly what behavior we're talking about. This step is really important because when we want to change behavior, we have to make sure everyone knows what it is exactly we're trying to change so that we can all work together, all perform whatever strategies we have in place at the same times for the same responses. So we want to define behavior really clearly, and then we're all on the same page. We all know what to do, and we can all tell whether it's gotten better or not. So that's a big thing too. We want to make sure that whatever they're doing, it's clear when it happens, and also when it doesn't happen so that we can say that we've been successful. The second step is where and when the behavior occurs. These are our antecedents. So this is the A part of behavior. We want to know under what conditions, what context does that behavior occur. An antecedent is something that comes directly before a behavior. It precedes the response, and it can be something in the environment, a stimulus, a person, an item, an object that comes immediately before the behavior. So where is the problem behavior most likely? Where is that challenging behavior going to occur? Is it in the classroom? Is it outside? Is it in your workplace? And then when do those happen? What are the specific events or antecedents within a routine that trigger that problem behavior? And here we're talking about immediately preceding the behavior. So we really want to know within 30 seconds of that response, what is the thing that comes before that turns that behavior on or off? These can be other individuals who the person you're thinking of doesn't like. You don't want to interact with them, and so this produces challenging behavior. This can be work that you don't like to do, or the person doesn't like to do. It could be a challenging worksheet. It could be a difficult task. It could be a new task that they've never done before. And these can be stimuli that are all around the environment that might be bothering or set off a challenging behavior. So a noise that is bothersome, music that they don't like, lights that are too bright, all of those kinds of things are potential antecedents that might trigger a challenging behavior to occur. The third step when we're thinking about challenging behavior is to understand why that response occurs. So we know what the behavior is. We've defined that response. We've identified a really observable, measurable definition of it. And then we've looked to the environment to try and figure out what exactly comes right before that response. What sets it off? What do we see immediately preceding it? The third step is understanding why that behavior occurs. What comes after the response that causes it to occur again and again in the future? We're really asking, what is he or she getting out of performing this challenging behavior? So this is a different kind of thought about challenging behavior, because what we want to know is what's the payoff for this response? And really, we start to think about challenging behavior as a way of communicating. Often we see these challenging behaviors occur in populations where they have limited communication skills, or there's a lack of understanding about social context. And so we want to know, what are they communicating with this behavior? Think about it this way. Let's imagine that you are experiencing a severe medical condition, and it's limited your ability to speak, it's limited your ability to communicate with others, and the doctor comes in your office and you're very thirsty, but you can't communicate this to the doctor or the nurses that are coming in. And so what you do is you start shaking the bed rails, moving your head around, squirming, experiencing all this challenging behavior. And the doctor comes in with a plan, and they say, okay, well, we're going to restrain this person every time they do this. Well, that's really going to get rid of that challenging behavior, but wouldn't it be nice if they gave you a button that you could press every time you were thirsty? That would also probably get rid of that challenging behavior. So here we're thinking about challenging behavior as a communication system for an individual who perhaps is having trouble communicating their wants and desires and needs. So we want to look and see, what does this person get out of performing a challenging behavior? And we use the principles of behavior analysis in order to understand these consequences, what they get out of performing particular responses. The first principle that we use is called positive reinforcement. And positive reinforcement, in positive reinforcement, what happens is an event occurs after a behavior. So we have a behavior, we have an event occur, it's added to the response, and that behavior increases or maintains in the future. So positive meaning something gets added to the environment, and reinforcement means that behavior is going to increase or maintain in the future. So behavior occurs, we add a stimulus or something in the environment, and the behavior increases in the future. So examples of this would be I'm crying at the checkout lane, I'm tantruming in front of the candy, Mom hands me a candy bar, and now I'm going to increase that behavior in the future because my tantrum got me access to that candy bar. That's what we call positive reinforcement. Negative reinforcement, often used incorrectly in everyday language, still refers to behavior increasing and maintaining. So whenever we talk about reinforcement, we're talking about behavior that gets increased or maintained. So in this case, we have a behavior, a challenging behavior occurs, and something gets removed. That's what that negative piece means. So we pull something out of the environment, negative reinforcement, and now that behavior increases or maintains in the future. So an example of this might be if your mom nags you all day to clean your room, and then you yell and you scream at her and you slam your door and she stops nagging you. Now you're going to yell and you scream, more likely to occur in the future because it's removed something really unpleasant for you. And so that's still reinforcement, is still going to increase the behavior. So we have the nagging is happening, it's really unpleasant, perform this yelling, screaming, slamming the door, and the nagging gets removed, and now I'm going to keep doing this because it was really effective at getting rid of that nagging from my mother. So this is negative reinforcement. And here we can see there's all sorts of functions of behavior. So we can have things that get added to the environment, so positive reinforcement things. And those things that get added to the environment, they can be socially motivated things that get added. So we can obtain attention from other individuals. We can obtain tangible items from other individuals. So we can be handed a candy bar, we can be handed a toy, or they can be activities that we perform this challenging behavior to access. We can also obtain non-social consequences. So these would include sensory stimulation. I perform some repetitive behavior like wiggling my fingers in front of my eyes, and now I get access to sensory stimulation that is pleasurable. I hum to myself in the car on my drive to work, and now I get to hear an average sounding song, not a great one, but it's pleasurable to me, so I continue to do that. And then we can perform things for negative reinforcement. So we're escaping or avoiding things that we don't like. And these also can be socially motivated. So I'm going to escape a person I don't like. I'm going to get rid of their attention. I'm going to escape an activity that is really challenging or difficult for me. I'm going to escape toys that I don't want to play with because I've played with them so many times before. Or I can escape non-social stimuli. So these are things like if I have a headache, I take a medication and I escape the pain from that. If I turn out the lights, I get to escape this really bright, awful lighting. And so those are escape or negative reinforcement consequences that are social and non-social. So just to kind of sum that up, we can think about challenging behavior as communication. It allows us to access or avoid different consequences in the environment. Some of those things can be social, like attention or play with others, and some of those things can be non-social, like sensory stimulation in the environment. The fourth part of the contingency are our setups, or motivating operations is what we call them. So these are events in the environment that make certain consequences more or less valuable. They either increase the value of a reinforcer or decrease the value of a reinforcer. So they're going to increase the value of a certain consequence or decrease the value of a certain consequence. So what this might look like is I've eaten a lot of food, I've had a lot of snacks. that's going to decrease the value of food as a consequence. So I'm less likely to do things that get me access to food. But if I'm super duper hungry, now I'm going to perform things that get me access to food in the future because it's now more valuable as a consequence. So it's going to change the value of that consequence for me, and it's going to change the frequency of responding for that behavior that has experienced that consequence in the past. And sometimes we call these setting events. The textbook definition, they're called motivating operations, but we're really thinking about more distant kinds of things. So not those things that come right before the behavior, but things that set up a challenging behavior for occurrence or for it to increase in frequency. So the difference between these, antecedents, that A comes immediately before a behavior. It acts as a trigger for that response, where a motivating operation, it indirectly sets up the problem behavior by altering how valuable those consequences are. So we talked about all sorts of consequences, and we could see things that might set up challenging behavior for occurring when they're typically followed by those consequences. So if you've been bored all day, you haven't got to go outside, having an activity to do is going to be more valuable. If you haven't taken medication or you haven't slept well, the value of escaping difficult tasks might increase. And so you're going to perform more challenging behavior that leads to that. If you had a fight earlier in the day, you may not want to engage with other individuals. And so the value of social interaction is decreased, and we're going to have challenging behavior that results in escape from those situations. So when we put this all together, we think about these ABCs, we have a model to understand the context in which challenging behavior occurs, the why for that particular behavior. So here's an example of putting it all together. We have a problem behavior, and in this problem behavior, the student is arguing with the teacher, refusing to work, and saying profanity. And so this is a behavior that we don't want to see, so we want to understand what's the context for this problem behavior. So we're going to look first at the antecedents. What comes immediately before that? So before that, they're asked to outline a chapter. They're asked to do some seat work. And the consequence for performing that arguing with the teacher and refusing to work is that they get sent to their office. And earlier in the day, there was an altercation on the bus on the way to school. So here we have something that increased the value of escaping that work because the difficult task was more unpleasant than it normally is. So we're looking at that setup, what comes before it, the challenging behavior, and then the consequence for it. And when we look at that all together, we can see that this behavior communicates that I need to escape this task, I want to get out of it, and we would say that the function of the behavior is escape from a difficult task. Another example, we have a child or an individual who always blurts out responses, sometimes cries in the middle of tasks. So let's look at what surrounds that behavior. Immediately before it, other students are asked to answer questions in the classroom. After they perform that blurting out and responding, the EA comes, sits down, and talks privately with the student about their behavior. And earlier in the day, that student forgot to take their medication as well. So here we have a motivating operation or a setup for this behavior where they haven't taken their medication, and it's made adult attention more valuable as a consequence. Immediately before the behavior, other students are asked to answer questions during a lesson, and the student blurts out and starts crying, and now the EA comes over, talks privately with that student. So here we see that this student is communicating that they want adult attention, but perhaps they don't have the skills in order to request that in an appropriate way. So we would say the function of this behavior is to access adult attention. So here's two examples. We have one where they're trying to escape something, so a negative reinforcement contingency, and we have one where they're trying to access something. They're trying to get attention. In both of these cases, this challenging behavior serves as a communication tool for someone who doesn't have the appropriate skills to either ask for breaks or know that they could take breaks, or someone who doesn't know how to ask appropriately for attention within the classroom. So what we've done here is started to take a look at the context for behavior and see, why does challenging behavior occur? What in the environment allows us to understand this behavior? What's the context for it? What comes before it? What comes after it? And what does it serve for the individual? What function does it have for an individual who is engaging in challenging behavior? Now, as a teacher or as a parent or as just a sort of general public individual, you can try to look at the environment for these functions and look at trying to understand what that behavior is communicating. But if it's a really significant challenging behavior, you may want to enlist the support of someone trained in behavior analysis. And what they will do is a formal assessment process where they come in and observe and potentially manipulate the environment in order to truly understand what function that behavior serves. So we can use these kinds of practices in every day for sort of non-significant challenging behavior, trying to understand why it might occur, what communication function it serves. But if we really have something that is causing injury or harm or really impacting the quality of life for an individual, then you really want to find someone who is trained in behavior analysis to come support you in that assessment process and help you understand why that individual engages in that behavior. So, taking this idea, understanding the context, why an individual engages in a challenging behavior, what function it serves for that individual, we can start to come up with a plan to support it. It's really important that we understand why the behavior occurs, because everything I tell you afterwards, you're going to use that function, use that why to help you support the individual. You might have experience with a behavior support plan if your child or an individual you know has significant challenging behavior. This is something that a behavior analyst puts together and provides recommendations for how to respond to that behavior and changes you can make in the environment in order to effectively support that individual. The critical features of a behavior support plan include finding ways to alter the before, the antecedents, the A's of behavior, in order to prevent that behavior from ever occurring. Then we try and find ways to replace the challenging behavior with more effective, socially acceptable behaviors. What can they do instead that's going to allow them to access those consequences, those things in the environment that they're trying to communicate that they need, that's more appropriate than the ways that they've been doing it in the past? Then we're going to reinforce. We're going to give them the things that they want when they do the stuff that we like them to do. It sounds very simple, but give them what they want when they ask for it, and don't wait for that challenging behavior to be occurring. And then we're going to find ways to redirect the challenging behavior when it does occur to more appropriate ways of responding. And we're going to try and minimize their contact with those consequences when they do engage in challenging behavior. So we're going to withhold good stuff when they're not doing what we like, and we're going to give them good stuff when they do the things that we like. And here is where we want to think about what are really appropriate, effective ways to access the things that they want. How can we teach them the skills to interact in a social world, in a social environment, so that they get everything that they like, so that they get to choose the things that they want without having to resort to challenging behavior? So these are called function-based strategies, and really the main principles, if you take anything sort of from this webinar, is how can I make sure that they access the things that maintain their behavior, the things that they want when they engage in a more appropriate behavior, and how can I prevent them from accessing those same things when they're engaging in problem or challenging behavior. So we really give them the things they want when they do the appropriate stuff, and don't give them the stuff that they want when they're not doing what they're expected. We call this a competing behavior pathway. So we talked about the motivating operations, the setups for a behavior. We talked about the things that come before it and how it triggers or sets off a problem behavior, and how they access that consequence that increases that behavior in the future. What we want to do is find replacement ways for them to access those same consequences, those same things that they enjoy and love, in more appropriate ways. So we're going to replace the problem behavior with something more appropriate for that social situation. And we're going to prevent them from accessing that consequence when they engage in the challenging or problem behavior. So the first step is we want to prevent that problem behavior or challenging behavior from ever occurring. We're going to prevent this by altering the antecedents. So here we talked about all these different motivating operations, or all these different setups for behavior. So one of our examples, the student didn't take their medication, and that made adult attention more valuable as a consequence. Well, here's an easy solution. Make sure that they're getting their medication every day. Well, it sounds really easy, but sometimes we need a specific plan. Maybe we need a medication check-in form. Maybe we need to program our phones in order to set a reminder for that individual. But how can we make sure that that setup doesn't occur? If they are more likely to experiencing challenging behavior after a poor night's sleep, is there a way that we can set up a sleep schedule so that we can make sure that they're in bed at the same time every day? Is there a way that we can reduce the demands when we know that they haven't had a lot of sleep? So we're looking for what are those things that set up behavior, and how can we get rid of them? That's all we really want to do, is remove those setups for a challenging behavior. And the next part is focusing on that antecedent piece. So how can we remove the triggers for the behavior? If we have an individual who experiences challenging behavior every time they're asked to read aloud during class, maybe we need to think about alternative assignments for a period of time while we teach them the skills to read aloud in class. So can we give them a one-on-one kind of read aloud assignment rather than reading aloud to the whole class? We're looking at ways to remove those triggers for what comes immediately before the response, removing the things that set off the behavior. Some other antecedent strategies, or things that come before the response, that we can use to prevent a challenging behavior from ever occurring. One of those could be prompting. Prompting is a strategy where we're introducing things into their environment that make it more likely that they're going to engage in a more appropriate behavior. For example, if we have an individual who constantly calls out during class, a more appropriate behavior, of course, is going to be raising their hand and asking questions. Can we provide them with gentle reminders to raise their hand during class? So an example here, you can see it on the corner of the screen, is a visual depiction of raising their hand. Can we give them a visual reminder simply to engage in that response rather than the challenging behavior? There are all sorts of different prompts that we might be able to use in order to encourage the more appropriate behavior. These are things like visuals, so something that we can present as a card or a picture or as a movie or as a model or something like that. We can also use verbal prompts, so we're just talking, giving. Remember, if you need this, you can raise your hand. We can do gestural prompts, so we're pointing to the activities that they need to engage in. We can use physical prompts if needed, so helping them, guiding them to using those strategies that are more appropriate. All of those are different prompts that might increase the likelihood that they're going to perform that more appropriate response. Another strategy that we can use before a challenging behavior ever occurs is to offer more choices to an individual. Something about offering choices, I see huge gains in reduction of challenging behavior. Even though it's fairly simple, we've gone from a person who they're using challenging behavior to communicate a problem. They're often not in control of a lot of their environment. They're told what to do a lot, and choices give them power. They allow them to make decisions about their environment and the things that happen to them, and that immediately increases their quality of life and their access to the things that they want. And so a lot of the time people say, well, I can't offer them a choice not to do their work. You can't. They have to do their work. They have to do their stuff at their desk. But you can offer them choices about a lot of other things. Do you want to use a red pen or a blue pen? Do you want to do the seat work here, or do you want to do it over there? Do you want to do this worksheet first, or do you want to do this worksheet second? All of these things, we can offer choices about everything possible, and then don't give choices when you can't. So think about ways that you can embed more choice into an individual's life, and you might see reductions in challenging behavior just as a result of giving more opportunity to make decisions. Another really simple strategy that is often very successful is using preferred items as distractors. We see lots of young children who have difficulty transitioning from one environment to the next environment, from outside to inside, from one class to another class. And here all we're doing is giving something that is highly preferred in order to distract them while they do a more difficult task. So if they're transitioning from one place to another, can we give them like an MP3 player or an iPod to listen to while they do that? Can we allow them to look at an iPad while they have their dental exam? And lots of places have started to do that now with the TVs at the dentist's office. So really just something preferable to distract them from the aversiveness or the unpleasantness of a certain situation. This can, again, really simple, easy to implement, and we can see lots of reductions in challenging behavior as a result of it. Another simple strategy that we might be able to use before behavior occurs is what's called a high probability request sequence. In this approach, what we do is we identify demands or questions that are very likely to have a student successfully perform. So a high five, a thumbs up, touching your nose, touching your head, things you know that this person will do nearly 100% of the time you ask them because it's very, very simple for them. Those are what we call a high probability request, very likely to see a response. And then we have something that's a low probability request. That's probably the thing that you see the challenging behavior in. So what you do is you sort of set them up for success, set them up for likely responding by presenting a whole bunch of these high probability requests, say 3 or so. So touch your nose, touch your head, give me a high five, great job. Now, can you put your books away? Something that's more challenging for that individual. So we present a series of high probability requests, things that are very likely to be met with success. We give them lots of praise, good things when they perform those behaviors. It's sort of like creating a momentum, right? We get that snowball rolling, and now it rolls down the hill all by itself when we ask for that more difficult task that follows. So really just kind of setting them up for success in these situations. So these are all things that come before the behavior, and now we want to think about what can we do for that particular behavior. We want to replace it with something more appropriate. When we're thinking about replacing challenging behavior, what we want to do is identify responses that are going to allow them to access the same things that they were accessing for challenging behavior. So if they're performing challenging behavior to get adults' attention, then we want to teach them a more appropriate way to ask for adult attention. If they're performing a challenging behavior to get out of a difficult task, let's teach them a more appropriate way to get out of a difficult task, like asking for a break or asking for an easier assignment, those kinds of things. We're replacing the behavior with something that is more socially appropriate, but still allows them to access those same consequences. One of the other things we need to consider when thinking about replacement behaviors is thinking about whether or not it's more efficient than the challenging behavior. So if you pick something that's way more difficult than performing the challenging behavior, I guarantee you they will not do it instead of the challenging behavior. What you need to do is find them something that is more efficient, that's easier, so that they can perform that in order to access those consequences, but in a more appropriate way. So it's got to be easy, it's got to get them access to the same kinds of things, and it's got to be more socially appropriate. So here's an example. Before recess, a student is asked to do a difficult task for them, and typically they engage in crying, and now that task gets removed. We can replace the behavior with something like asking for help. That task becomes less difficult. They get to avoid and escape that difficult task in a more socially appropriate manner. We want to pick something very easy. This could be raising their hand. This could be handing over a card that says help. This could be some kind of indicator, just saying help out loud. Any of those things are easy and still allow them to escape that difficult task, but in a more socially appropriate way. And then, while we think about replacing that behavior, what we want to do is build skills for them to complete that behavior that is expected. So in the short term, let's find them something to replace that challenging behavior, but we can't have them avoiding and escaping difficult tasks for the rest of their life, right? They're not just going to ask for help every single time they get something that's difficult. What we need to do is also build skills in the area that they are lacking in order to allow them to achieve success on those problems and access the things that every other individual normally accesses when they do, say, a challenging worksheet or a challenging task, right? So here, we're building skills, and in the meantime, we're replacing that with a more socially appropriate behavior. So we can think of these as sort of short-term and long-term goals. A lot of the time, we see that challenging behavior occurs, like I said, as communication, and because there are skill deficits which they are experiencing, and so these tasks that we present to them are much more difficult, much more unpleasant, and so they're going to engage in challenging behavior to say, I don't get this, it's hard, and I need a break. And so what we want to look at when we see challenging behavior is also where are the areas that we need to build in order to make them more successful in these contexts, in addition to giving them replacement responses that are more socially appropriate. So we see skill deficits in the area of academics that might lead to challenging behavior that results in the avoidance of difficult tasks. We see students with organizational skills or a lack of organizational skills perform a lot of challenging behavior in order to escape from those academic task demands. So maybe this person is really not understanding how to organize a planner, how to log what assignments, when they're due, that sort of thing. So if we build those skills, we're going to see less challenging behavior related to escaping those tasks. We can also see that lead to a lot of challenging behavior related to the avoidance of adult attention. And I'm sure this is sort of the classic teenager situation where they haven't handed in a lot of work because they have these organizational skill deficits, and now they really want to avoid their mom or their dad, especially during report card time, because they don't have the skills to organize their life. They're getting all these bad grades, and now we want to get away from that negative attention from our family. And then we see a lot of challenging behavior related to social skills deficits. So individuals or children who don't know how to ask for attention, don't know how to play with others or start play with others, who don't know how to properly start a conversation or leave a conversation or just tell people that they don't like something. And so we see challenging behavior that gets them lots of attention from others. So it might be screaming or crying or making smart comments within the classroom, and well as avoiding peer attention. So I hit someone and they leave me alone, and now I don't have to share my stuff with them because I don't have the skills to share appropriately. And sometimes when we're thinking about these long-term skills that need to be built in order to reduce the amount of challenging behavior, we don't want to go from just asking for help to now completing a whole worksheet. That's a big jump. So first, I'm going to teach them to ask for help. They'll get out of this, and now I'm just going to expect them to do the worksheet. That's likely not going to happen. What we need to do is build in small steps. Maybe we need to break that skill down into smaller pieces, and so that that individual can slowly gather the skills needed to perform that long-term behavior goal. So this is an example. So a student might be asked to do multiplication or division with multiple digits, and they perform challenging behavior and they escape that difficult task. So my replacement for that is I'm going to give them the skills to ask for a break from difficult double-digit tasks. So that's the first thing they do, and that's at the bottom there. And the final goal for them is that they can complete those multi-digit math problems independently. That's at the top. So there's a big jump from just asking for a break to being able to do it. So what I can do is think of small steps that I can break that down in order to slowly work them up to that final desired behavior. So maybe it's asking for a break from one or two kinds of problems. Maybe they can cross off a certain amount of problems on the sheet, and we slowly build up how many they can cross off. But here, they're slowly working their way up to that desired skill. And the last piece here is reinforce, redirect, and minimize payoff for that challenging behavior. We want to reinforce the replacement behavior. If we've decided that we're going to let them ask for a break in order to escape a difficult task, you better give them that break when they do that appropriate behavior, or else they're not going to use it as a strategy instead of their challenging behavior. We want to make sure that we do it immediately, and we want to make sure that we do it consistently. When the problem behavior occurs, we're going to redirect them to that replacement behavior. We're going to guide them to engage in that more appropriate response so that they're always performing the socially acceptable, the desired behavior in order to access the things that they like. And we're going to minimize payoff for the challenging behavior. If they perform a challenging behavior in order to access attention, so if they're saying lots of loud things in the middle of the classroom, don't take them aside and sit down with them and give them a whole bunch of attention when they perform that behavior. We want to minimize the payoff. If they're performing a lot of challenging behavior to escape a difficult task, we want to try and keep them engaged in that task until the challenging behavior is stopped and until they've performed that more socially appropriate behavior. So really, whenever we're trying to decrease a challenging behavior, we always have to be looking at what we're trying to increase to replace it. So never decrease anything without finding another strategy or another skill that we might be able to increase in order to replace it and in order to allow them to still access the things that they want and need, but in a way that is more socially acceptable. So this is an example. It's got a lot of words on it, but it's more detailed, and it's really putting all of these ideas together. We have a student here, and we're seeing that they're refusing their seat work, they're doodling, they're doing all this kind of off-task challenging behavior, and they do it when they're given really difficult tasks. And the consequence for that is that they escape that task. They don't have to do it anymore. Sometimes if it's really bad, they get sent to the hall or sent to the office. And so this here, they're performing this behavior in order to escape a difficult task. So we've selected an alternative behavior. They're going to take a break from writing. And we've got a whole bunch of different strategies here that we can do before, during, and after the behavior. So before here, we can teach the student to ask for a break. We're going to give them the skills to replace that behavior. After, we're going to give them a break when they ask for a break. And then we're going to prompt them to use asking for a break when they engage in challenging behavior, engage in all that off-task behavior. So here we've really taken this idea of looking before, during, and after the behavior. What can we do in order to minimize the occurrence of this challenging behavior in the future? So all of these, we're talking about the principles of applied behavior analysis. We're thinking about how do we go about analyzing the context for behavior? How do we go about changing the context in order to change behavior? And here, if you really want to get more knowledge about this, to understand these principles of behavior, be able to use them and apply them. We do offer a program in applied behavior analysis, a master's program, and this would qualify you the coursework requirements for a board certified behavior analyst, which I talked about at the beginning. And these are the individuals that you'll be calling when you have a significant challenging behavior that you want to have a functional assessment and behavior support plan designed for it. This is a couple of resources related to challenging behavior and the functional assessment process. And if you have any further questions, you can always send me an email at nneal@uwo.ca. Thanks, and I hope you got a lot out of this info session.